So the procedures are this, for those that are interested. We will conduct a public hearing this afternoon, right now at 1:30. And you'll be given an opportunity to speak either against or in favor or ask questions of the conditional use requests. This evening, you'll also be sworn in this afternoon as well as this evening at 7. This evening we'll repeat that procedure. However, at that time, the committee will make a recommendation to all of council, either to pass, to turn down, or to the proposed conditional use. So we have 3 items that are up today for that public hearings. And I'd like to ask a representative from our law department to please swear in those that wish to testify before the committee today.
All right, okay. Anybody who's here for a public hearing, please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If you do, say I do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Very good. The first item that is up for public hearing today is authorizing a conditional use to construct an office facility at 539 White Pond. Mr. Antonucci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. DRK Partners LLC is requesting to construct a new 7,500 square foot office building and parking on this property. The single-story office building would contain 7,500 square feet of office floor area. The prospective owner of the property is a medical practice, which is Akron Oral Maxillofacial Surgery. The single-story building would be placed perpendicularly on the lot, setback 40 feet from White Pond Drive. It would have a modern appearance with exterior material consisting of steel, glass, and wood. The street entry will align with the existing traffic signal and entry to White Pond Crossing, which is directly across the street. Traffic would flow along the south side of the building to access parking on the southeast sides of the building. Landscaping will be planted throughout the site, and dense landscaping or solid fencing would screen the property from the neighboring properties to the north. This area of White Pond is an area that has transitioned from residential to retail office uses over the years. Proposed office use is compatible with neighboring office and retail uses. Petitioner states the building would allow the retention of 35 jobs within the city. This proposal offers the opportunity to create new office space within a state-of-the-art building for a relatively low traffic generating use without being out of character with the neighborhood. Both Planning Commission and Planning staff recommend approval subject to conditions.
Thank you, Mr. Antonucci. At this time, we'll open the public hearing portion and ask if there's anyone here wishing to speak in favor of the conditional use request at, excuse me, at 539 White Pond Drive. If you could please provide for us your name and address.
Hi, my name is Fred Zampano, and I live at 2772 Jumpers Drive in the city of Akron. I'm here in support of this project. I would act as the designer, developer, builder of this project. The primary owner of the practice is also a resident of the city of Akron. They're presently located in the White Pond area, but in a building that was built in the late 70s, early 80s. And so they're looking to modernize their facility, also to bring in another practice at that site. We found this location where there's an older home built in the 1960s. It's not really of historical value, but it's presently on the site and it's presently being used as a conditional use office building. So we would like to demolish that home, remove right now it's on a septic system, which is unusual for White Pond Drive. And we'd like to bring sewer to the new structure and build a modern office building. And I've got some renderings here, and I can answer any questions that you'd have about it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Is there anyone else here wishing to speak in favor of the conditional use request at 539 White Pond Drive? Anyone else here wishing to speak in favor? Okay. Is there anyone here wishing to speak against the proposal at 539 White Pond Drive? Anyone wishing to speak against? Okay, very good. Now we'll open it up to any committee members, should there be any questions From any committee members, Ms. Amobian. I'm sure we can.
I have three renderings for you today. The first one is an exterior perspective of the building itself. There's also an aerial perspective of how it would sit on the site. There's an elevation perspective. There is also a aerial view that shows the neighboring uses. And then there's also a landscaping, conceptual landscaping plan for the property.
This exactly? What, is it a corner?
It is directly, right here is Degnacy's Restaurant. So here's White Pond.
Right,
Down here is Mall.
okay.
And there's a red light where you go back into that office development, White Pond Crossing. So we would propose to change the signal at our expense and have a signalized entry into the development. And the entry point would be directly across from White Pond Crossings entry.
Very good.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Any council members? Mr. Swirsky?
So, is it knowing that you feel that necessary, it's needed,
This is actually for an owner and they are in this complex right now. So they're looking somewhere on this west side, yeah. And we found a lot right here in Akron. So, and they're residents of Akron.
Thank you. Good. Any further questions or comments? Very good. Seeing none, we'll invite you back to seat at 7 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Very good. The second item for a public hearing, authorizing a conditional use to construct the Center for Advanced and Energy Technology building at 885 Mall Avenue.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, First Energy is proposing to construct a transmission lab to be known as the Center for Advanced Energy Technology, CAET. The new building would be located at the southwest corner of the First Energy campus, approximately 55 feet north of Mall Avenue. A single-story building would occupy approximately 88,000 square feet of area, reach a maximum height of 27 feet. Exterior materials would consist of a combination of precast concrete insulated wall system and a brick veneer. The building's been designed to complement the low profiles of nearby structures. The main access to the facility would be through an existing drive on the west side of the property with staff and visitors parking, visitor parking for 73 vehicles on the west side of the building. Supplemental landscaping and existing large evergreen trees along Mall Avenue would remain and would provide additional screening to the site. The drive is already signalized to control traffic on Mall Avenue. Proposed $37 million building would be dedicated to evaluating, testing, and training staff on new digital grid technologies that enhance the company's ability to serve customers. Approximately 20 to 25 First Energy employees will be assigned to staff the facility, which would provide classroom space for 50 people to train. The facility would also be used for evaluating and testing equipment to ensure that it complies with industry standards. Operations will occur during normal business hours, Monday through Friday. Because the frontage along Mall Avenue is being developed, sidewalks should be installed to connect the existing sidewalks to the east and west, and the Mall Avenue street surface should be improved. Planning staff recognizes the facility is a substantial investment in the company's West Akron campus. The center represents an opportunity for the company to showcase both the campus and community to visitors coming for training, while allowing the company to remain on the leading edge of its industry. Both Planning Commission and planning staff recommend approval subject to the conditions.
Thank you, Mr. Antonucci. Very good. If there's anyone here wishing to speak in favor of the conditional use request at 885 Mall Avenue, please feel free to.
Thank you. Kirk Gardner, Manager of External Affairs for First Energy. As you heard, this is an 88,000 square foot facility that we're asking to build on Mall Avenue. It's a $37 million investment for us. It's a facility where that will support our efforts to modernize the electric grid across our 6-state service territory. We'll be able to test equipment there, evaluate it, as well as train engineers and technicians on how to use it and install it. Be 20 to 25 full-time employees, and as you heard, up to space for up to 50 people to be trained at any given time. These are engineers and technicians from our 6-state territory that'll come into Akron for a week at a time on average to be trained on this equipment. We're asking for a conditional use so that we could hopefully break ground in March.
Good, thank you.
I have with me today Rob Habel from Braun and Steidel, and also AJ Ajibojo with First Energy, works with me in our facilities department. So if you have any questions, Rob, be glad to answer in detail.
Up is on, okay. I can just give you a real quick walk through the building and show you the renderings. As said, is 88,000 square feet, predominantly 4 large 10,000 square foot labs. And basically what's going to go on in there is it will be the ability to simulate activities that would go on a normal day-to-day in the transmission facilities around the region. So you can troubleshoot, you can set up situations where a system may fail, and how you train folks to fix that and to address that on the fly. So this is a unique opportunity, one of the first in the country to allow for those kinds of activities to happen offline, if you will, so that the folks who are being trained are able to more quickly resolve issues when they really occur in the field. As was mentioned, 50-person training classroom, office space for 50. We're going to be populating 25 of those initially, so we have some growth potential. And then when people come through, we've got sort of this long gallery, and it has windows, so you'll be able to tour people through that facility to show them the activities that are going on in there with regard to, especially from the training standpoint, to see the actual hands-on activities that are going on. That will be supported by what we call the depot. A lot of equipment will be coming in. It will have to be assembled and then set up in these these labs for those activities. So we have this truck dock. It has a screen wall, so any of the trucks that would be there would only be there temporarily, would be screened from view. We set the building back 55 feet, and that's pretty much the setback of the adjacent 2-story buildings, the apartment buildings that are just to the west. So we try to keep the scale consistent with that. So some of the building elevations, a combination of white concrete precast high insulated panels with brick. The brick matches the brick that are at some of the adjacent campus buildings. It's the same brick that's at the office building on Frank Drive and the adjacent building off of Mall behind it. So sort of 3 elevations, the main entry, which is off to the west, and then as you go and would walk around the building. Some of the, this is what the labs will kind of look like. I know you're not concerned about what it looks like inside, and if I had to explain this to you, I wouldn't be able to, but it's a lot of complex equipment. This is from the lab designers, where we created a 3D model showing some of the equipment on the inside. If you're curious when it's all done, you should get a tour, because it's going to be pretty interesting building. So I do have the materials board. Can you all see that, or should I lift it? I'll lift it. So these are the actual materials: the brick, the concrete. This will be a stained concrete, a little darker in some accent areas. Metal, 2 different colors of metal fascia panels. These pictures represent sort of the intent of what it would look like on a finished building. This is the mesh that we're using as an accent, and we're actually going to imprint by stencil the First Energy logo on that. It's going to sort of have a nice high-tech, clean look to it. Any questions?
Thank you. We'll reserve that for after the public hearing, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Stay right there if you don't mind. Is there anyone else here wishing to speak in favor of the conditional use request? Anyone else wishing to speak in favor? Anyone wishing to speak against the conditional use request at A5 Mall Avenue? Anyone against? Anyone against? Okay, hearing none. Is there any questions from any committee members or council members at this time? Ms. Mobian?
Now, if my directions are correct, this is going to be on Mall, facing Mall.
Yes.
It's going to be kind of in front of that mysterious-looking building back there.
Yes.
Okay. But this one is going to have windows?
Yes.
Oh, I see. Okay. I couldn't tell. But
Yeah. There will be, oops, I'm going to take two hands to do this. Thanks. It's heavy. Yeah, the office portion will have significant windows, and then we do have glass along the front and around to bring in natural light.
Now, traffic, are we increasing? I know there is a turning lane there to go into that other place.
Right.
Is this going to be fine with traffic?
Yeah, this actually lines up with their existing drive. It has the traffic signal there, so it would all line up with their
So
existing.
we don't anticipate more traffic?
There shouldn't be.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Swirsky?
Yeah, this is an exciting project, and we welcome your investment. The building appearance is pleasing. What about, and I know you guys know about this, energy efficiency? Are you taking some steps
Yes.
in that direction? That
The building, we are going for LEED certified with this building, yes. In fact, actually the previous mysterious building that you mentioned, Ms. Mobian, was LEED silver. So yeah, we're pushing that. These are difficult buildings to get LEED because of energy consumption, because of what they're set up to do, but yes, we're pursuing LEED.
Great, that's excellent. Appreciate that.
Mr. Neal?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, thank you for the investment in the area. I just have one concern that I want to make sure we keep in mind. And Mr. Antonucci, I don't know if you're familiar with that area. When it rains real heavy, that road out there kind of floods out. So just want to make sure that whatever, I know on Mall Avenue we have the, I get them mixed up, retention pond, whatever type of pond, whatever we can do to make sure that as much water, especially since we're taking up some land mass, to keep the water on the site.
Yes, it's been designed. Unfortunately, our civil engineer is sick with the flu, couldn't make it, but the way the site is situated, 2/3 of the water goes to the west and 1/3 goes to the east. So we are maintaining that natural course of flow, and we're maintaining it, we're detaining it on the site. On the site that's on the west, that gets detained and eventually makes it into Frank Creek. On the site, part of the site on the east, it's detained on site, and then it's slowly released through an existing structure to across the street into the natural drainage path.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, sir.
Good. Further questions, Ms. Sims?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just out of curiosity, so the facility is going to be used for what type of training?
Training for the transmission lab. We call it a transmission lab, so it will have a setup of equipment that will mimic what happens at a substation, for instance. And of course, this would be offline, so they can test new equipment to see how it works. They can troubleshoot it, if you will. They can cause failures, and how do you respond to that failure? So it allows people in a sort of a laboratory environment to train for real-life activities that will eventually, at some point in time, occur out live in the field. And so we have 4 different cells. Each one has slightly different activities going on. We have a 4th cell that that's open for the future. They've been talking about someday, you know, the automotive grid for electric cars and things like that. So they're looking towards the future in terms of how they could expand this building within the square footage provided. So there's a lot of different uses that can happen in this building for the transmission side of the First Energy's needs.
Yeah, it sounds like an awesome project. Let me ask you this question. I don't know a whole lot about First Energy in terms of your operations, but from an environmental standpoint, is there anything that we should be concerned about in terms of how we rid ourselves of tools that you all use to test and that kind of stuff?
Nothing on this site, no. This is not about energy generation. It's more about the transmission side. So this is all equipment that comes in that they test, and so there's nothing of that sort that would be going on.
Okay, so this is about testing and...
Right, it's not a chemical lab, it's not that kind of, it's a laboratory.
I guess that's the question I really wanted to know, to make, if it was, that we have...
It's a technical laboratory.
Okay, that's good to know. I too concur with my colleagues, and thank you for your investment in the community.
Very good. Any further questions or comments? Thank you. Hearing none, you
Thank you.
invited back this evening at 7 o'clock as well.
See you there.
We will now move on to item number 3, which is authorizing conditional use to install 2 brine wells west of Manchester Road, south of the Tuscarora River. Mr. Antonucci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Cargill, Inc. is the lessee of this 119 acres of land. In 1968, the City of Akron approved the lease of city-owned land for the drilling of brine wells. Petitioner is requesting permission to drill 2 additional brine wells to be known as well number 80 and well 81. Presently, 26 wells have been drilled on the city property, of which 13 are currently active. Petitioner states replacement wells must be drilled in order to maintain brine purity and saturation, as well as providing a continuous source of feedstock to their salt production plant. The area immediately surrounding both well sites was vacant wooded land. Existing gravel roads are utilized to reach the proposed wells. Each proposed site would contain a vinyl sided shed measuring 17 feet by 9.5 feet in width. This shed is enclosed with chain link fencing. The drilling of 2 additional brine wells in the remote area will not have an adverse effect upon the surrounding area. Both Planning Commission and Planning staff recommend approval, subject to the conditions.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Antonucci. Is there anyone here wishing to speak in favor of the proposed conditional use to install 2 brine wells on Manchester Road?
Yes, we're here. I have a handout.
Sure.
I'm A.L. Langenfeld. I'm a senior project manager at Cargill. I reside at 1665 Smokerise Drive, Akron, Ohio. So in the handout, we address what we believe will be some of the concerns or questions that there might be. Just wanted to say that Cargill operates a salt production facility in Akron, supplying salt products for food, agricultural, and water conditioning uses. The plant's been in operation since 1901, and we employ over 100 employees and contractors in the area, with a payroll of close to $6.5 million a year. Cargill currently operates 13 wells on land owned by the City of Akron, paying royalties for mineral extraction. So it's these brine wells that allow us to continue to produce and pack and employ people at the facility.
Thank you. Anyone else here wishing to speak in favor of the conditional use request? Anyone else?
We're here to help if there's questions.
Okay, good. Perfect. All right, thank you for coming. Anyone else here wishing to speak in favor? Anyone wishing to speak against the conditional use request for brine wells on Manchester Road? Anyone against? Anyone wishing to speak against? Okay, very good. Hearing none, we'll invite you back again this evening at 7 o'clock.
Okay.
We'll have an additional public hearing. Thank you. Questions?
What are the risks of brine wells?
What are the environmental risks you referred to protecting the environment?
There's, we control, you probably answer this better than I can.
Carl Carlson, lead engineer under AWOLD. So as we say, we're drilling for brine wells, so as you'll see in the handout, our intent is to use a primary containment to retain any fluids that might escape equipment, such as hydraulic fluid or anything. And then in addition to the primary containment, we put every piece of equipment in a secondary containment to give us 2 layers of protection in case there are any fluid releases. And as far as the overall environmental risk, we're producing brine, salt saturated water, so that's really the main risk is if somehow there was some fluid release.
So if it did release, what would happen?
Well, as far as if there is a pressurized release, we'll use a blowout preventer, which is essentially a fail-safe, basically large valve that'll slam shut and close off the wellbore from allowing any fluid to escape. And then, there's really the main thing is making sure that you have a good drilling plan, you use sound equipment, and do thorough inspections and safety meetings daily.
So if it got out into the water, what would it do to it? Say if there was an accident, if there was a problem?
If something like that were to happen, it would be really comparable to, as we see in the winter, all the salt we spread out on the roads. So in the same way you spread all the salt out and it rains, it kind of washes off. That's the potential. But we try to use primary, secondary containments and good well control to avoid anything.
Ms. Mobian?
I'm reading this, it looks like you are already at this location or close to it,
Correct.
and you're expanding to bring some additional wells on, is that what you're doing?
Correct.
And we purchase salt from you or something, brine and salt from you every year to salt our roads and stuff. Are we short?
So we, as we mine wells, or use the wells to solution mine, as your one well is depleted, take it out of service, and then you need to drill a new one to maintain your production.
So you close the other ones that are...
Correct. All of the wells are permitted under the ODNR, and they regulate how long you can use a well for, the annual inspections, the testing, and then once a well is complete, they'll give you permission to test it again, close it in, and then you have to apply for another permit to drill a new one.
And this land belongs to the city?
So,
The land belongs to the city?
correct. Yes.
Are you leasing, or what are you doing from the city?
Yeah, we have the mineral lease agreement, which, so we have the surface rights just for the well, which, as you'll see in the handout, we're just going to leave a 25 by 25 footprint with a little vinyl shed, and then there's a full restoration plan to make sure that all the grasses and woodland areas restored to its previous condition.
So, do we get paid for this?
Yes.
We get reimbursed? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to appoint the committees, let them know that item number 15 under the conditions, there's 16 conditions, item number 15, and this is something that was set up and established a long time ago. This reads that the lease payments to the City of Akron shall be designated to benefit Ward 9 in accordance with ordinance number 378-1993. So just FYI on that. So, thank you. Ms. Mobian, did you have a question? I'm sorry. Item number 15 under the conditions. Okay? Yes. Yep. Mr. Swirsky?
Yeah. So in terms of an outside governmental agency inspecting you guys, inspecting the site, I thought I heard you say that it's once a year, the Department of Natural Resources? comes by. Is that all? It's just once a year?
Well, we do our quarterly inspections as well, but as far as witnessed,
You mean you inspect it yourselves?
oh, we inspect them multiple times a day.
Yeah.
Okay. So you do a lot of self-policing?
Yeah, we do.
So the safety of the project really is mostly dependent on you guys
Yes,
policing
so
it?
my name is Greg Jacknotes. I'm the plant manager. I currently reside at 565 Apple Valley Circle in Delaware, Ohio. We have what we call a well attendant, who its sole responsibility is to maintain the brine field. So they're out there numerous times throughout the day, checking all of the well heads, all the lines, inspecting the grounds to make sure that we do not have any leaks and everything is operating correctly, along with automation that would tell us that if we see a pressure drop, a flow change, anything like that. And then in addition to that daily, we also do our monthly and quarterly inspections. And then we have sonar, gamma ray inspections that we do based on I don't know the frequency off the top of my head, but based on the ODNR's recommendations, we do those inspections on all the wells and then report all that information to the ODNR.
Okay. So there's a dedicated staff person whose responsibility is
There's
the
a
ongoing-
dedicated staff to that, and then that person reports to a supervisor who oversees that, and then there's also a production superintendent. And then part of Carl's responsibilities is maintaining not only oversight of our brine wells, but all the other Cargill evaporation sites that do a similar process.
Okay,
across
but
the
in
country.
terms of an outside governmental inspection, it's once a year?
Correct.
And while we're drilling, we have ODNR representatives coming out for different parts of the drilling operation.
Mr. Neal?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm taking a look at the map, and if I understand the map correctly, there were 79 other wells drilled before these here, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Are the other ones capped, or are they still functioning?
It's a mixture. So some are still in operation, but a lot of them are plugged.
Okay.
So as Carl was mentioning, as we use up a well, if we use up a well, we then have to go back and plug that well.
In an area like this, what's the maximum number of wells you can drill, thinking safety purposes?
On the land that we have mineral rights to?
Yes, sir. I mean, because I'm looking at the map here. I'm just wondering how many.
Right, so it's limited by what you have the surface rights to, and so currently our projections, so we'd have approximately 6 more wells on this piece of property.
6 more.
Further questions or comments? Samples?
Thank you. Can you explain your safety protocol a little more in depth to me? I appreciate Councilman Swirsky's questions, but I'd like to know, how do you handle, I see you say you have emergency shut-off valves in case, you hit a pocket of gas or fluid. Explain to me, has that happened, and if so, how was it handled, and how many times has it happened?
We have not experienced that while drilling. It's merely an industry-wide standard that you have that in place. In addition to not only the mechanical safety devices, we'll have our third-party engineering group is going to be providing a safety specialist that'll be on site while we're drilling, as well as myself, as well as our brine operator, to make sure that we have oversight over the whole project. And then Cargill's requirements of a contractor, our contractors have to meet certain safety requirements and as well as environmental requirements, so we avoid using a mom and pop outfit. We like to use only the best contractors available.
Okay, so on you said the environmental component of this. I know you said you guys have the self-check that you all do. So who do you check with as far as the environment goes? Do you guys have to give reports to the EPA? Do they come out and inspect you, or is there some other environmental group who comes out and inspect you outside of yourselves?
The ODNR has primacy in this state, so different states, sometimes it's regulated by the EPA, sometimes it's regulated by the state, and in this case it's the ODNR. And so we're working with them. We file a permit with them and are reporting to them while there's criteria you have to report to them if you deviate from your drilling plan.
Have you had any infractions under them?
Not since I've been a part of Cargill, and not in any of the 13 wells we're operating right now.
So none of you have been around when you guys have had any infractions, so you're saying you've never had not a one?
No, we haven't experienced any problems while drilling.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions or comments? Mr. Swirsky.
Yeah, you mentioned that the risk was similar to the city putting our rock salt on the streets, but here you're talking about rock salt beds at a depth of, what's the figure?
Approximately 2,800 feet depth.
That's down, right?
Correct.
Okay. So isn't that a different thing than some surface, rock salt on the surface spread out over a whole city? This is on one small location in a pretty...
I believe the reference was if we would have a brine spill, it would be similar to this time of year where you have a heavy concentration of rock salt on the ground, and then you get a thaw or you get a rain, and all that washes off into your storm water, into your local creeks, things like that.
But this is all concentrated in one spot, right?
Correct.
And it's 2,700 feet, is that?
At the bottom.
Feet down, right?
It's-
Is it make it a little closer to the aquifer?
The aquifer is generally about 500 feet and up, and so you have approximately at least 2,000 feet of solid dull stone and shales and other types of rock between your aquifer. And then in addition to that, I should mention the well schematic. The design of a well is basically to protect the groundwater. All permitted wells are regulated under the Clean Water Act or Safe Water Act. And so the general construction of wells, a pipe within a pipe within a pipe, and only that innermost pipe sees any fluid, and the outer pipes are there specifically if you were to have any failures to protect you from fluid release.
Yeah, I see you got some backup systems.
Correct.
I appreciate that. But it's still only inspected once a year by an outside government agency, right?
Correct.
After it's been in operation.
It's 2,700 feet down.
Yeah, but we monitor.
But you're saying it's way below the aquifer, so it won't be a threat to the aquifer?
Correct.
Further questions or comments, Mr. Milkovich?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, it says here that the process of extraction entails water entering the rock salt bed. Where does this water come from, and how many gallons?
We generally operate the wells at about 120 gallons per minute, and then the water is, we recycle the process, so you bring water in, evaporate off the water to produce the salts, and then the water is re-injected to resaturate.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. So you're taking the water in from a different, source?
We generally pull, as we're permitted to pull some out of the canal, correct?
Yeah.
Pull it out of the canal, and then, like I said, though, it's a closed loop system.
And we have wells as well, our own personal wells.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Further questions or comments? Very good. Thank you. You're invited back this evening at 7 o'clock. We'll have an additional public hearing. Thank you. Okay, we'll now move on to the balance of the agenda. Short of any concerns or questions, we'll now move on to the new list of legislation, of which item number 1, ordinance approving the 2018 Akron Neighborhood Maintenance and Empowerment Program, authorizing the Director of Neighborhood Assistance to enter into a contract after publicly advertising for bid proposals for services related to mowing or publicly owned lots. Mr. Valley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Committee, and members of Council. This ordinance would, the Department of Neighborhood Assistance wishes to establish a program through which civic organizations and/or companies will provide mowing services for city-owned lots through a process in which lower-income Akron residents may receive on-the-job training and workforce skills and training. This program will specifically seek to partner with organizations that employ or train Akron residents facing particular unique obstacles, including veterans, individuals with disabilities, new Americans, formerly incarcerated individuals, homeless or recently homeless individuals, and individuals involved in recovery from addiction. Since the Department of Neighborhood Assistance was created in 2012, that has been our goal, to try to reach out and try to get more nonprofits involved out there in the specific wards, and you know, and get that community buy-in. And we've been very successful, and every year we're trying to bring on more and more. So, with that, I'll ask if there are any questions.
Good. I noticed that the funding formula here is $30,000 from workforce development, correct?
That is correct.
And then the other $175,000 for grass cutting. What fund does that typically come out of?
Well, the $30,000 would be coming out of CDBG, and
Right.
the $175,000 would be coming out of the Department of Neighborhood Assistance budget.
Okay. Income tax dollars primarily.
General fund.
Good. Very good. Okay. Very good. And I assume these organizations, they have to have like a 501c3 or?
That is correct.
Further questions or comments? Ms. Mobian.
So this is something new, and certainly I like the plan, providing opportunities for individuals to learn on the job. And it sounds like it's going to be are you going to do something with continuum of care? So those agencies, because he talks about the homeless population and others, are these agencies, how are you going to notify them or identify them?
Well, there'll be requests for proposals, so we'll be advertising for bids, and we could also get private contractors that are interested in this, but their requirement, they'll have to provide the job training component. And we have worked with, and we have Cornelius Benson from King and Queens. He's in the audience today, and I'm glad to see him. He has been mowing for us for about 5 years. He contracts with Truly Reaching You Ministries, and they do mowing for us in the Summit Lake and Kenmore area, and he's been providing a job training program through his company for quite a few years.
And the $30,000 is based on?
That's how much money we're going to set aside for the job training component of this.
I mean, do we base it on so many individuals at the minimum wage, or what are we talking about?
I think that figure was looking at what it might cost to for an entity to do those services. So whether it's do a lecture once a week for an hour on job training skills or career assistance, what that might cost for the time period that we were looking at, which was several months.
So the $30,000 would be the workforce development funds that these requests for proposal would go after. Is there a limit to the proposal, or what are you looking at in terms of how many proposals are you looking to?
Well, right now we're working with 6 contractors right now.
Okay.
And I don't think we've really have made that decision yet how we're going to break it down per
So it wouldn't be 5,000 each or something like that? I mean, 5 times 6 is
that
about
very
30.
well could be.
That very well could be. But the 175 is to pay the individuals for doing the
To
grass
actually
cutting.
mow the grass, and we're talking about the public vacant city properties, planning properties.
Okay. No, I like that. And this is the first time you've done this particular kind of format? I know you've been using private contractors in the past.
This is the first time that we're going to advertise for bids through this format,
Okay.
but we had been using nonprofits. I mean, last year we used Weaver Earth Care from Weaver Industries, Wenco, truly reaching you ministries with Mr. Benson and King of Queens. Last year we used the South Street Missions. We've been in conversations with the Andecy, and we're working with the Well CDC also to be a partner this coming year.
And I'm assuming you're pleased with the work that you've gotten out of those organizations?
Very much pleased. In fact, Mayor Horgan would like to see us have at least 10 contractors similar to what I've just mentioned. So this is the direction we're going, and we think this will probably encompass about 70% of all our vacant public properties out there.
Thank you.
Mr. Neal?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Valley, thank you for your work on this. I know we've asked and had conversations, and when I say we, I'm talking about members of council going back some years, so I appreciate you bringing this to us. Have a couple questions based on questions and / suggestions, just in case I didn't understand Councilwoman Amobian's, the answers you gave Councilwoman Amobian. The administrative piece, that the $30,000 that will go out to administrators. I know Mr. Benson, and there's been some others that have worked. I just have one suggestion, and this is where a collaborative collective working with your department and those groups, so that we know that we have a best practice that's continuous no matter who it is that's doing the training. And it may help us extend that $30,000, where if there was like a day when all the nonprofits and community organizations that do this would come in and collectively put together a training program that all of them would use, it may help us extend those dollars, and then we would know from our standpoint what to expect, what type of work to expect, what the workers should be doing, because it would be consistent no matter who it is, what company's out there, because it's a protocol that will be developed that will kind of like be the My Neighborhood, Our Akron way. That's just my one suggestion, because having 5 or 6 different companies, they all do a good job, or else we wouldn't keep them, but they all may have different methods. And that's just one suggestion. The other thing is I hope that, one thing we've pushed for is make sure as much as possible in our wards we can have groups that are from that area, close to that area or from that area participate. And so hopefully we can continue to focus on that as well. And again, I know you've been conscientious on that, but just want to make sure that as much as possible we can have.
That is our goal, trying to team up somebody in that particular neighborhood.
Okay.
That works best.
Any other committee members?
Thank you.
Sims, did you have a question?
I too say thank you, Mr. Valley, for all your work in this area. So the $175,000, the $30,000, is that an additional?
That would be an addition. That would be for the job training component.
Okay, that's
The $175,000 or $173,000 would be the actual paying of the contractors to cut the grass.
Okay, so I know we talked about this before. I think we talked about districts at one point, how we can do that, almost like when we look at our tow companies or what have you. Is there any way that we're able to know by wards, I don't know if you've ever done it, what the acreage of land that we are responsible for in each one of those wards? Just out of...
We do have that. We have a list of all the vacant city-owned properties by ward, and I can provide that. And I believe that question came up last year, and I provided that, but we'll get it to you.
Thank you. And the last one was, one of the things that are kind of like a pet peeve, kind of, sort of, is the grass, when all the clippings are left out, instead of either getting them up or having a bag on the mower. Are we looking at doing that? I'm just saying only because it goes a long way in terms of the aesthetics of a neighborhood when that's done in the right way. So it looks like it's been cut and not sickled. So I hope we're kind of looking at how we do better.
We are always looking at best practices on how we can improve. And it's always that first cut, when the contractor arrives and the grass is really growing on the vacant city properties, and sometimes it's a little more difficult. In fact, a year ago, we had to have the contractor do each one on the first time. They had to go over it a second time. But we're always looking at that, especially with our private contractors on our private lots that we site and assess, but we're always looking at ways that we can improve.
So did we ever explore the possibilities of requiring that they have the bags on their mowers?
No, we have not done that, but one of the requirements is, sweeping up and blowing the grass up. But the problem that we have is how much we pay for, these contractors. The privates are anywhere around $19, $20, $21 per cut. And the nonprofits through this program and what we've done historically, it's just a little bit more, but they do take more pride because they're invested in that community, and they do a much better job.
Well, I don't know. Maybe perhaps it's worth looking at what we're paying, because from a safety standpoint, from an economic development standpoint, sometimes the way those lots look can be a deterrent or signal something that's not necessarily true related to the safety of that community. So it is more than just, bagging it up. It's the implications when it's not done properly on a neighborhood. So I don't know if it's I think it's worth maybe us evaluating maybe what we're paying for cost, and to put those stipulations that they either have a bag on the mower, at least after the initial cut. I know sometimes you don't know what's in there when you're going in the first time, but at least thereafter, maybe consider doing that. Thank you.
We could always take a look.
Thank you.
Mr. Neal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Valley, I was just kind of brainstorming as Ms. Sims was saying that. I know I would always like, and I think other council persons have asked, a list and even like a schedule on when they should be cut so that we can go through. And the brainstorm that came to mind was we have had a challenge on maximizing the use of the My Neighborhood Our Akron grant. It's possible that if we had this list and we know when they're supposed to be cut, we could engage some of our youth in our communities to do a round, because we would know what lots are supposed to be cut, and they can make sure that they're cleaned. And by the end of the summer, that would be their service hours where they could then turn it in for those grant dollars. Because I think every year we've been sending back somewhere in the neighborhood of at least $70,000 in that grant, and that'll help us utilize that, and we can tie some other community service things into that. But I understand the challenge that you have. That's why I appreciate this program, because we do, with Mr. Benson and those folks who are from the community, do get a better cut and better care. But that's one way we can leverage our two programs to possibly assist. If we could get a schedule of when those cuts are and have who our people are that are cutting, we could possibly tie that in with that other program.
We could do our best trying to get a schedule. Each contractor gets approximately about 125 lots. During the April 1st through November 15th is the grass cutting season. They're to cut 8 times during that season. And a lot of it's weather related. I mean, we don't know, what the rain's going to be like in May and June. And you guys know a few years ago how much rain we've had. And it's not only our department trying to keep up, but it's everywhere. It's the state trying to mow expressways and trying to mow your golf courses and things like that. So it's going to be very much weather related. And this list also is very fluid, because planning, you guys see during the course of the year, lots for little, parcels come in. We sell them to adjacent property owners. So we're adding and subtracting properties all the time. So we can definitely provide you the list, and we'll do our best to try to give you updates on where we're going to be at.
Okay.
Further questions or comments? Very good. Seeing none. Mr. Valley, are you in a hurry in terms of getting this started, or consent agenda okay?
Consent agenda would be fine, but since the fact that we're not here next week, I would request that we suspend rules. That would give us another couple more weeks to get this out, because if we put on consent, we're not here for 2 weeks.
That's reasonable. Thank you very much. Is there a request for suspension of the rules with a favorable report?
So moved.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. You guys have it. Mr. Clerk, Mr. Neal would like his name added to this piece of legislation. And also, before we adjourn, request a motion to accept the minutes of the last meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? The ayes have it. Thank you. We're adjourned.
I was a little afraid. Yeah. Did you tell you that we had tried to get it going? And Moore was kind of favorable, at least in one business. But then Phil Neighbors kind of, took it over and. Hello. Yeah, and Phil does do it, but the other side.
It's a cheap project.
Sorry about that.
Where we met last time, I don't know if it has a name.
Yeah, that's, remember you asking me. Okay.
Something small. Are decorated in an interesting musical
Here's Robert.
I'd like to call the public service meeting to order. All members are present. I'd like a motion on the minutes from our previous meeting. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay. I'd like time on our previous agenda items that are still on. And now I'd like to go to what's before us today in our new legislation. We have an ordinance authorizing Director of Public Service to enter into an agreement and/or legislation with the Ohio Director of Transportation for the construction of the Canton Road resurfacing project for certain improvements from the Southern Municipal Corporation limits to Wedgewood Drive, authorizing the appropriation and/or expenditure of funds and declaring an emergency. And I believe that Mr. Moore will be speaking.
Thank you,
on
Madam
this.
Chairwoman. This project, this would allow us to enter into a contract with ODOT for the paving of 91 Canton Road. This would be the part that's left. We paved from the expressway bridge all the way to the northern corp line last year, and a little piece in between Wedgewood and Market. But this would allow us to do the rest of the road within the corporation.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? Are there any questions from other council members in the chambers? Councilwoman Sims.
So these funds part of the 1/4% income tax?
No, ma'am. This is 63,000 of GO. We'll have about almost 100,000 of special assessments, and then the rest is paid for by the Ohio Department of Transportation.
Okay, excellent. Just quickly, on
Would that be right?
the prioritizing of roads for the income tax, do we have that? Are we planning to do that? So we can see that?
We're still in the process of developing that information. We'll have that probably within the month.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, what is your pleasure on this?
We would appreciate suspension of the rules because we're off next week.
Do I have a motion for suspension of rules? And a second? All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none? No. We have one other piece before us today. That is an ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service through the Office of the Purchasing Agent to enter into contract without the formality of advertising for bids with M-Tech for the purchase of Granite Net inspection software and/or associated services and declaring an emergency. Mr. Moore?
Yes, Madam Chairwoman, this will allow us to purchase software. It would actually replace two pieces of software that we use now. And, we're projecting about a $15,700 annual savings by purchasing this software, so it'll pay for itself in about 3 years. We use it to televise both our sanitary, our combined, and then our storm sewers. The IT department has evaluated this, and they concur with our choice.
Mr. Moore, how much was that as savings a year that is projected? Obviously not.
A little over
yours yet.
15,700, I guess.
Okay. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, are there any questions from council members in the chambers? Okay, what is
Consent
your
would be
pleasure
fine.
on that?
Consent would be fine.
Consent? Okay, do I have a motion for consent? Second? All in favor? Okay, that will receive its consent. Thank you, Mr. Moore. Is there anything else to come before the Public Service Committee? Seeing none, we will be adjourned.
Thank you.
Too far.
Don't go real far.
Yeah.
2, 3.
You're on this.
Oh, I'm on.
Go home. You want some?
You can go ahead and get it started. Mr. Keith, are you ready?
I
like to start when everyone's talking.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and call public safety meeting to order, please. We are running behind in council chambers, please. All members are present, and we do have 3 new pieces in front of us today. We held a meeting last week. Can I get approval of those minutes, please?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. If you have a discussion, it'd be great if you take it outside. All right, our first new piece is authorizing the purchasing agent after publicly advertising for bids to enter into a contract for the purchase of 5 washer extractors for the use of the Akron fire stations and declare an emergency. We have Chief Tucker here with us today.
Good afternoon. First of all, these are the extractors that had previously been discussed that actually remove carcinogens from fire gear that we want to put in every station. The legislation before you there is to get 5 extractors, 3 of which would be from Issue 4 money.
Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief. Any questions, committee members? Mrs. Keith, please.
Thank you. Chief, will this now bring us that every station will have one with the additional 5?
That is correct.
Music to our ears. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Keys. Councilwoman
I guess
Sims,
there's only
please.
one word I want to say, Mr. Chairman, and that's happy. And please add me to this legislation. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Committee members, council members? All right, what's your pleasure, Chief Tucker?
Yeah, if we could suspend the rules, please, so we can get these in the stations as quickly as possible.
Can I get a motion to suspend the rules,
Motion
please?
for suspension of the rules?
Second. We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you, thank you. Don't go too far. I think you're up next, too. All right, our next piece, authorizing the mayor through the office of the purchasing agent to enter into a contract after accepting informal sealed bids for the purchase of uniform materials for the fire division, approving specifications, therefore, and declaring emergency. Chief? Chief?
This legislation is to continue the fire department's yearly uniform allowance per the agreement between the city and Akron Firefighters Association Local 330. This collective bargaining agreement provides for a clothing allowance for each employee for the purchase of uniforms at either Levinson's or Akron Uniform.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions, committee members? Oh, Mrs. Keith?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. May I have my name added to this one and also the previous one, please?
All right. Mr. Clerk, you hear that?
Yes.
All right. Any other questions, comments? All right, with that, what's the pleasure?
If we could also suspend the rules on this one, I'd appreciate it.
All right, Chief, can I get a motion for suspension of the rules, please?
I move for suspension of the rules.
Second. We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, thanks, you two. I appreciate it. That's it for you two, I guess.
Thank you.
And we'll pass that this evening.
Thank you.
Our last piece is a resolution offered by several council members expressing support for the enactment of Ohio Revised Code Section 5.2516, which designates the month of February as Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month in the state of Ohio and declaring an emergency. Who wants to speak of this, please? Mrs. Sims?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So it's my honor to submit this resolution with the hopes of support from the entire council that designates the month of February as Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. First of all, I just want to give kudos to State Representative Amelia Sykes with her introduction of House Bill 94. That really was the impetus for a lot of the work around dating violence, period, in the state of Ohio. But this one in particular, for teen dating, I think just so appropriate. You know, as the legislation outlines, approximately 1.5 million high school students nationwide experience physical or emotional abuse at the hands of a dating partner. It's not something we really talk about as much as we need to. Matter of fact, I was pretty alarmed to learn that in terms of where the young folks really have to go when this is happening to them, that less than about 30% inform their parents that they're even involved in relationships where there is violence. And I would say, don't be disillusioned by the fact this is just not women who are having violence imposed upon them, but also men are not probably as equally likely for it to happen, but it happens far more regularly, I think, than we really realize. But finally, not only we talk about teenagers, to find out that this is, there's been a growth in the number of young folks in that tween category between 11 and 12 that are experiencing violence in dating relationships. I think it's believed that 1 in 10 teenager will report to have been physically or verbally abused in this current year. So I'm very pleased. I know about several months back, a few of my colleagues here were able to do a conference on Love Doesn't Hurt, just as a reminder, and again, to raise awareness of the fact that if you're in physical abusive, verbally abusive relationships, that is not love, that is abuse, and there is resources to help you get out of that and to live a more productive life. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Sims. Any other committee members? Mr. Neal, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our colleagues that brought this, but I'm sure it was not intentional to leave those of us of the male persuasion off of this piece of legislation. I'm just half joking. But I do commend, I know Sister Amelia Sykes, State Representative Amelia Sykes has worked very hard. I remember having some folks ask me, what's the importance of resolutions? What's in a resolution? Well, resolution means that this body takes a stand. So I think this is one piece that we can all rally around, the men and the women and the men on council, and work with the youth organizations within our wards throughout our city to do some programming, some extensive programming. You know, one of the best ways for a young lady to know how to be treated through a date is by the way she's treated by her father and by the men in her family. And I just think there's some powerful things that we can do as a collective body to help push this resolution out into the community. But I am poking at you guys. I appreciate your leadership on this one, but I think we have something to add to this too, that we can help you promote this resolution out into the community. Don't you think so, Mr. Swirsky?
I support it.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Neal. I also, when I got this resolution over the weekend, I kind of looked at it, and I did not read the Ohio Revised Code section that's stated in here, or followed what our state representative did, but I was hoping that it did involve teen boys. I actually have a story that I'd like to share in regards to one of the residents that I know in my ward, but I'm not going to share that, so I'm going to hold that back. So, Mrs. Sims, go ahead, please.
With all due respect, I appreciate my brother and colleagues, but primarily we initially prompted this piece of legislation because it was consistent with the work we had done months earlier around violence in women. So there was never any attempt to even suggest that you fellas aren't down with us. It was just a continuation of the work that we had already undertaken. So we welcome you to join us. Matter of fact, we encourage you to, and I hope that by the close of today, that we'll pass this piece with council and mayor and council as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sims. Any other questions, comments? Mr. Hope, please.
Yeah, I just had a question about what exactly are we going to do in order for bringing this awareness out? What's going to happen? Where's it going? How are you going to follow through on it?
So as I mentioned, Mr. Chairman?
Oh. Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Certainly there's a number of organizations that are already doing work around this. Battered Women's Shelter is certainly one that comes to mind for me. But as individuals on this council, we have initiated that work. I think it's important for us as a city that represents the entire city, the young folks know that we see them too. And by doing this, and also to raise the awareness to parents, to be looking for signs, to understand that they have young people who are engaged in abusive relationships that they're not aware of, to prod in those relationships. So awareness is just that, to raise the awareness. And my hope is that this just doesn't stop here during the month of February, that we're cognizant of this and helping young folks better understand their own value and to expose them to resources to help them if they are in abusive relationships. So it's not a one fell swoop. We're going to make this happen today. It's an awareness. It's a campaign. This is the first year that the state has sanctioned it, and I hope that we're willing to do the work, not only as sisters who have already begun this work, but from all accounts, just from hearing Councilman Kamer and Councilman Neal, they've had some experiences too. And I think it's in that silence that we don't share that people often think that this is not happening to young men, and in fact it is. And so that's our commitment. That's my ongoing commitment, and I hope you join me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sims. Mr. Hoke, you're okay? Or do you have any other questions, or?
No, I'm not really sure I understand the whole gist of it and where, how are we getting it? The only thing that's designated on here is that we're sending something to Columbus. And other than that, there isn't anything on here that says what's going to happen or where's it going and who's going to take care of it. And, if we do something and, and we're passing resolutions, let's make sure that it benefits the city of Akron and the residents of Akron, in some fashion, other than sending notification to Columbus that, yeah, we agree. And that's what I'm saying. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hoke. Any other questions, comments? Mrs. Amobian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know that one thing we can do, and we've talked about this in other matters, is using our website to highlight initiatives like this and to list organizations that are providing services to young people and having them join forces with us to do something about this, as we do with other issues like the opioid epidemic. I mean, the Adam Board and others have taken on this crisis, but there are other organizations in town that serve children and families, and they can certainly join forces with us as well. And we can make that part of what we do.
Thank you, Mrs. Amobian. Mr. Neal? Sorry, Mr. Okay.
Well, I was just going to make
Mr. Swirsky.
a motion for approval.
Oh, well, let me take his question now real quick, since he deferred.
Thank you. Just one thing that came to mind, something that we can do, keeping in light Councilman Hoke's concern and speaking to what others, Councilwoman Sims has spoken, doing some things. We're coming up on springtime. You have spring court and, most importantly, prom that's coming up, which is a rites of passage, that whole graduation process for children. But with that rites of passage, sometimes there are for some lack of a better word, stigmas or traditions that people think are supposed to happen during prom that put people in uncomfortable situations. So I think one thing we can do is definitely possibly get with just invite the class presidents in, or ask schools to identify leaders and just talk about what is a healthy dating process. That's one thing we can do, because a lot of times pressures are put on people because of that period of time. That's just one brainstorm, or one small thing that we could do. I like Councilwoman Amobian's piece where we could bring in, youth organizations and some of their youth, and just have a sit down and just break bread with them and just share, what are some of the proper, healthy ways to date. Just a few suggestions, Mr. Chairman and Ms. Sims.
Thank you, Mr. Neal. With that, any other questions? All right, Mr. Swirsky, we're about to...
As I understand, we're just adding our voice to others that are already working on this, others that have spoken out. We're just adding a voice, and it's a voice that's on the right side. So I'd like to see us pass this as an emergency.
Okay, so that's a motion for suspension of the rules.
Suspension of rules.
Can I get a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? All right, so we'll pass that this evening. With that, we're adjourned. Thank you.